can't say I foresaw this outcome.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Oh, hey. What?
God!
All this? Oh, yeah, it looks pretty bad, don't it? What happened? Oh, like I know? Not every bad thing that happens in this shop is a result of my antics. However, this may be one of the rare occasions where that may be false. Okay, let me just say that this wasn't entirely my fault. It was at least partially the fault of a certain early 2010s flagship laptop. Okay, history lesson. Let's get away from the burning building behind me and talk about everyone's favorite time period to have occurred within the past 2 decades, the mid-2000s. Brief pop stardom, low bitrate MP3s, Blu-ray, the freaking Nintendo DS. So many great things were brought into the public conscious as media and technology advanced at a stupid fast rate. While little Billy was at home watching the Kids' Choice Awards, his dad was at Future Shop trying to pick out whichever Bluetooth earpiece would make him look the least like an asshole at his next work function. With the increasingly short lifetime of hot new consumer electronic products, existing reputable names grabbed a hold of this momentum and introduced their new products. Remember the Zune? Yeah, me neither. Failed music players aside, this time was also kind of an evolution period for existing product lines. One of the most prominent examples could be seen coming from Apple. Apple was hot on the heels of a new age of consumer electronics with things like the iPod and their increasingly powerful laptop computers in the form of the PowerBook series. However, as the mid-2000s went on, the PowerPC architecture that was a mainstay in Apple's computers until that point started to seem a bit stale when compared to the competition. While these processors had dominated Apple's range of computers for nearly a decade, the growing efficiency of newer processors, the adoption of 64-bit processor architecture, and PowerPC's general inability to play nice with x86 software prompted Apple to ditch these CPUs in favor of offerings from Intel.
Today, it's time to begin a third transition. We want to constantly be making the best computers for you and the rest of our users. And so it's time for a third transition, and yes, it's true. We are going to begin the transition from the PowerPC to Intel processors, and we are going to begin it for you now and for our customers next year.
Beginning in 2006, Apple would begin phasing out the old PowerPC processors with Intel's current offerings in the form of the Core series. The popular iMac All-in-One would go from a G5 processor to a Core 2 Duo, and their line of portables would soon follow. The PowerBook series would be slowly discontinued as Apple introduced their new big thing. Alongside this new Intel-based iMac, Apple also brought out the MacBook Pro, their first portable to come with an Intel processor. These early Intel MacBooks bore a striking resemblance to the PowerBooks they replaced, but came with some great new features. Aside from the new processors, the new MacBook Pro also introduced the MagSafe charging port, a long-loved element of the machine that has since seen a return in the latest models of the lineup. Wow, a new Apple product that isn't entirely rehashed from something released years prior? Isn't this so exciting? Well, hold on to your seats because things are about to get even fucking cooler. You see, this video isn't about the first MacBook Pro. No. This is about its Chad of a younger brother. I'm talking about the legendary Unibody MacBook Pro. Introduced in 2008, the Unibody MacBook Pro is a pretty big step towards the modern MacBook as we know it today. Milled from a single piece of aluminum, this laptop had a sleek and sexy design while still keeping very respectable performance. This redesign wasn't without its omissions, though. Gone were things like DVI and FireWire 400, thrown to the wayside in favor of more modern options like FireWire 800 and the newly introduced Thunderbolt port, which also doubled as a mini DisplayPort connection and supported up to 10 gigabits per second of bandwidth. Spec-wise, this unit was offered in various configurations, affecting things like screen size, memory size, and processor. As far as the screen goes, 13, 15, and 17-inch models were up for grabs, as well as the option to upgrade the standard panel to a high-resolution anti-glare display. The 2011 model year was also the last year that a 17-inch option was offered for a MacBook, keeping the 13 and 15-inch models the only options available until relatively recently with the newest MacBook Pro models. This model year introduced the second generation of Intel Core i processor to be used in the line, with clock speeds ranging from 2.0 to 2.7 GHz as a base speed. Adding on to the list of first and last, this year was also the last year where 4 GB of RAM would be offered as a baseline standard for the line. Future models would up the higher-end models to 8 GB at minimum. Now I know what you're thinking. God, when is this guy gonna shut up about how amazing and great these stupid laptops are? First of all, rude. Second of all, right now. See, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. These laptops still have their fair share of issues, some of which that are especially noticeable when trying to use these units today. The first of this machine's shortcomings is the hard drive. Many Apple computers during this time, and even later, I'm looking at you iMac, came standard with a 5400 RPM mechanical hard drive. You could order custom configurations that included a 7200 RPM drive or even an SSD, but sadly many of the models you'll come across, including mine, still have the slower drive, which was pretty unimpressive even for the time. Another more minor setback of the 2011 MacBook Pro is its Bluetooth support. While Bluetooth 4.0 had already been out for about a year and a half at the point of this laptop's release, this model still only had support for Bluetooth's older 2.1 standard. Not a big deal, but oh, just you wait. See, with many people, one of the more, how should I put this, important aspects of computer usability is being able to see things. One might even call it a fundamental aspect of computing. This laptop don't see it that way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the biggest problem that plagued Apple's computers at this time was that of failing graphics cards. These MacBooks came not only with Intel's integrated 3000 series graphics built into the CPU, they also had a dedicated AMD Radeon card in the 15 and 17-inch models that would automatically kick in when performing more graphically demanding tasks. Now, this is a very helpful addition. At least it would be if it worked. See, Apple is no stranger to faulty components. This wasn't even the first time they'd had an issue with a faulty graphics chip. That or would go to the first generation MacBook Pro and other earlier Apple computers from that time that had nvidia GPUs. See, computers, and in this case the graphics processors inside them, can get very hot. The problem with the chips in these models is that sometimes they'd get so hot that the little balls of solder connecting the processor to the computer's mainboard would just melt. Just go gloopy. This gloopiness resulted in graphical glitches and incredibly loud fan noise at best, and at worst, a completely non-functional machine. The issues with the Radeon card were first noticed in iMac units containing them between 2011 and 2012, and the MacBook Pro was soon to follow. While Apple offered a service and repair program to replace the faulty components, it didn't solve the problem at its source, instead replacing the broken parts with new ones that would also inevitably fail. And fail they did. Many customers who had their units repaired ended up having the same problems years or even months down the line. This resulted in a class action lawsuit against Apple and also the start of a repair extension program that would fix affected systems after the date of discontinuation. However, these repairs still carried the same issues as previous efforts. So yeah, kind of a deal breaker, right? Can't really use a laptop if there's nothing on the screen. I sure wish I'd known about these issues when I bought mine secondhand years ago. That's the thing though. This wasn't really a huge issue when this laptop first came out. Most issues didn't even begin to surface until at least 3 years after its release, so there was still a valid reason to like these units. It was a lot for customers to love. Surprisingly, it had a sleek, thin and light design and some pretty stellar performance to go with it. It was 2011, any high-performance laptops were usually the size of a high school science textbook, so for something that was less than an inch tall when closed, it did whatever you needed it to do and more. Now let's talk about my machine, the current source of all my problems. It's got an i7-2760QM, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and a 500 gigabyte spinning hard drive. This was my laptop towards the second half of my high school years. Before this, I was still using whatever $300 Best Buy special I had scrounged my money up for in middle school, but things were different now. I had a job, and could now fulfill my childhood dream of owning an Apple computer. Let me explain. As a kid, I grew up with beige and black boxes running Windows like many other people I knew. The only times I got to have any sort of experience or interaction with Apple products were with the old iMac G3s and eMacs we had in elementary school. And by God did I want that same experience at home. They were computers like I'd never seen before. See-through plastic, bright and glossy user interface. Alas, it was not meant to be. Apple products were always too expensive for me and my family and weren't really a necessity. Our computers at home worked fine and did everything we needed them to. But for years, Macs always carried an air of mystery to me. What was I missing out on? Were they really that cool? According to my old DeviantArt page, 5th grade me certainly seems to think so. So when I was finally in the market for a new laptop in high school, I realized that maybe it was time to give my younger self what he'd wanted all these years. I got on eBay, and a couple weeks later I had it. A spec'd out 2011 15-inch MacBook Pro. What my younger self thought was unattainable was now sitting right in front of me. It broke 6 months later. I was on a family trip and somehow my laptop had come out of standby while zipped up in my bag. I unzipped the bag, pulled out the now scorching hot computer, turned it on, and lo and behold, it had red lines running up and down the screen. I had no clue what was going on. Was this laptop that I had most definitely overpaid for now nothing more than a shiny paperweight? Well, luckily, no. While my laptop's GPU had succumbed to its inevitable heat death, there was a workaround to make it at least somewhat usable. This workaround came in the form of a patch created by dosdude 1 that actually disables the faulty GPU and forces the computer to run using only the Intel graphics at all times. Now, I'm not going to explain the whole hack. I have some more important things to attend to. Basically, it involves booting into single user mode and setting some flags that disable the GPU. I don't really know the technical details, but what I do know is that it works. dosdude has also more recently made a permanent solution that involves soldering a programmer to the main board and reflashing some firmware, but I don't have the money or abilities to carry out such tasks. Anyway, there I was, sitting in a hotel room, hunched over my piping hot laptop, punching in magical little letters that would somehow bring my baby back to life. I rebooted, crossing my fingers, and wouldn't you know it, it actually worked. My MacBook would live to pump out schoolwork and garbage trap beats another day.
New track out, it's my best.
Granted, this fix wasn't without its compromises. Obviously, I couldn't use the more powerful dedicated graphics anymore, which basically made this machine a 13-inch with a bigger screen. I also now had to control the fans manually. See, the GPU might be disabled in software, but the actual card is still getting power and running, so it still got hot. I use a program called SMC Fan Control to keep an eye on my temps and set the fan speed accordingly. This sadly made this laptop one of the loudest ones I've ever owned. Regardless of the issues I had from it, I still used it for a good while after the GPU died. It wasn't great, but it was good enough. I got this laptop years after it hit the shelves, and even still years after the GPU issues began to surface. But it still met my expectations and had enough juice left in it to leave me surprised at how decently it performed at times. Was the hard drive slow? Well, yeah, but considering I was coming from a cheapy HP laptop and SSDs were still a little bit out of my price range at the time, whatever I lacked in drive performance I made up for elsewhere, and in general ease of use. It speaks to the longevity of these 2010 MacBooks. Yeah, Apple was still the designer, hipster, Starbucks drinking computer brand that it had been at the time, but behind the flashy aesthetics lied some actual good products. This computer brought a lot of good to its end user. Minus that... Yeah, sadly this laptop is the reason the shop is on fire. I dug it out of storage earlier this week and tried to get the GPU working again by calling upon a long-dead god of fire to grant me control of the elements. However, I'm very bad at Latin, so whatever I said probably didn't translate very well and resulted in the disaster that you see behind me. Fires aside, I'm still glad I got to re-experience some of my memories with this thing. It had its issues. Nothing as noticeable as some other Apple screw-ups like Bendgate or the iPhone's antenna issues that plagued the tech news space during the 2010s, but it still had its place in the list of Apple repair extensions and recalls. Honestly though, it lived on well longer than you'd expect it to, even in a half-broken state. In the years since, the MacBook line has had its ups and downs with underpowered laptops and less than stellar build decisions. Butterfly keyboard. But I must say, the Unibody series of MacBooks still stands as one of the best iterations of Apple's portable offerings, at least in my opinion. Now, I should probably find out if I'm gonna have to start looking for work elsewhere.
You have a giant truck with a water hose attached to it! Give me the hose, man! I'll do it! You're taking like 10 years to put out this fire! Come on, man! My stuff is in there! Do your job! Do it better!